So welcome to you all. This is the City of Bremerton's West Kitsap Way Planning Study virtual presentation. This is our second presentation on this planning study, and we're excited to show you what we've been doing on this project this evening. Just to give everyone a heads up, we have it looks like right now we have 7 people in the audience. So welcome to each of you. Thank you for joining us on this glorious evening, taking the time to learn about the West Kitsap Way Planning Study. Next slide. All right, so as we kick off, I want to start us off with a few tips and tricks for our Zoom webinar. Everyone is muted except for the folks that are presenting. And if for some reason you need to speak, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you. You can use, if you have questions, please use the Q&A window to submit your questions or comments, and use the chat window if you have any technical issues. If you can't see us or hear us or anything like that, and our tech support staff will be on to assist you. So that's kind of the rundown of our Zoom tips. So next slide. Welcome again. My name is Katie.Ketterer. I am the project manager for the West Kitsap Way Planning Study. We also have with us tonight several members of our consultant team, including John Davies, who's going to be giving most of the presentation this evening and sharing information with all of us. We also have Alaya, Natalie, and Shelley from SNA Communications, who are helping to run the back end of this webinar. Thank you all very much. And joining us from City of Bremerton staff are Greg Wheeler, the mayor, and Tom Nucky, the Public Works and Utilities Director. Next slide. So just to give you a quick rundown of our agenda tonight, what you can expect to see, and what we're going to share with you tonight is we're going to have our quick welcome, which we're in. We're going to go through a little bit of the study background and purpose, just to update anyone who hasn't been engaged with the project yet. Then we're going to go through the proposed alternatives that we have for this project. And at the end of the agenda, we will have a question and answer session. So we'll have a chance to hear from you all if you have any questions about what we've presented tonight. And then we'll wrap up the meeting with some next steps and some links to some places where you can get more information. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to John, who's going to take the reins from here and get into the rest of this presentation. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Katie. So the Kitsap, or the West Kitsap Way Planning Study, is really all about trying to define a new corridor for Kitsap Way between State Route 3 and Chico Way Northwest. And this is really an important corridor. It provides access to homes, businesses, parks, and connects people between Bremerton and locations to the north in Kitsap County. So Kitsap Way was originally designed as a highway, but it's over time been functionally replaced by State Route 3, which pretty much provides a parallel corridor for people driving. Approximately 11,000 vehicles per day travel on Kitsap Way. But this corridor's got a number of issues. The pavement's old, it's cracked, it makes a lot of noise as you drive along it. There's very little way of sidewalks. There's nothing for a bicycle facility other than the shoulders of the roadway. There are a few crosswalks, making it really difficult for people to cross Kitsap Way or even to access a bus stop on the other side of the street. The design of the roadway is 2 lanes in each direction, and it also has these wide shoulders and some little bit of banking on the corners, and it really encourages people to drive at higher speeds, and it creates a few safety concerns when we start talking about the corridor's intersections. This project was funded by a federal surface transportation grant, which was awarded to the city of Bremerton. And really, those funds are being used to study and develop a plan for the corridor's improvements. Next slide. The city has determined that this segment of Kitsap Way really needs to be reconstructed. And what that really means for us is that we have an opportunity to create a roadway that's going to meet both the existing and future needs of our community. The planning study will evaluate alternatives and develop a set of recommendations to improve safety, add pedestrian bicycle facilities such as sidewalks or bike lanes, and increase access to transit, provide access to properties, and accommodate future growth. Next slide. So just to give you an update on where we are in the project schedule, in 2022, we evaluated the existing conditions, developed a model of future traffic conditions, and held our first open house in December, where we heard your concerns and thoughts about the corridor. Since then, we've been working on developing a set of alternatives for Kitsap Way, which we're presenting tonight. In the mid 2023, where we are right now, we're going to be developing and selecting a preferred alternative, which will be presenting at a third open house. So that's going to be really our next step after this meeting. We'll then be turning our focus to refining the preferred alternative and prioritizing and looking at how we can phase these corridors improvements. Towards the end of 2023, we're going to be preparing a final report and presenting that to the City Council. Next slide. Using our community input from the first open house, the project team developed 3 distinct alternatives for the Kitsap Way corridor. And these alternatives really helped us study a range of improvements for the corridor with the idea that, that final preferred alternative could be a combination of elements from any or each of these alternatives. So alternative A was really focused on the idea of what could we be developed as sort of the minimum lower cost, with that expectation that we're still going to have to rebuild the roadway and things like that. Alternative B is going to add some additional features, but there's going to be a little bit more added cost. And alternative C has the most improvements, but also some of the higher costs. Next slide. Working with our city staff and our project steering committee, we quickly understood that we really have 2 distinct segments of the corridor. Kitsap Junction, where the garage and Red Apple are, and really the rest of Kitsap Way, sort of between east of Harlow Drive and Wilmot Street, or Lakehurst and Wilmot. We worked with the following criteria to really help us develop the alternatives, and this criteria is shown in this list below. It's really about, trying to get safety, pedestrian and bicycle facilities, support our future traffic volumes, have something that will accommodate current Kitsap Transit bus operations, provide property access and minimize the number of property impacts, and the amount of cost for having to purchase right of way. Next slide. So the resulting alternatives really share a number of characteristics. First of all, Kitsap Way would become a city street instead of this highway that's been kind of left over in time. It would really be brought into sort of the fabric of the rest of Bremerton. The roadway would be reconstructed, having one travel lane in each direction and either a center turn lane or a raised median. We looked at all the traffic volumes, and we really think that the forecast would support just having one travel lane in each direction. That said, as we approach the interchange at State Route 3, Kitsap Way would widen out to becoming 2 lanes in each direction. And that's really to handle the higher traffic volumes at the interchange. All alternatives would share common features such as new landscaping, lighting, bus pullouts, and storm drainage. All those factors are kind of common features that we're placing in all of our alternatives. So in terms of the typical roadway section, next slide, please. This is what we'd envision for Kitsap Way. And just simply, it's a single lane in each direction in that center turn lane, or it could be a hard median down the middle. Next slide. So what this graphic is showing here is something that we quickly realized. With taking out the 2 of the travel lanes and the shoulder areas, we can really fit our proposed improvements, including travel lanes, including landscaping, and the pedestrian bike facilities within that same 75 feet that there is of existing paved area. So by doing this, we'll drastically reduce the cost of needing to buy property and construct costly features such as retaining walls. So let's now get into our specific alternatives. Next slide. So alternative A constructs a new Kitsap Way with that single lane in each direction and a continuous center left turn lane. It will feature new pedestrian bicycle facilities on both sides of the street. At intersections, left turn lanes would be constructed on Kitsap Way with the idea of having traffic signals improve operations and safety. Next slide. Within Kitsap Junction, alternative A has that 3-lane roadway we've been talking a lot about. And then on either side has shared use pathways on both sides of Kitsap Way. And then the blue boxes are this idea of a parking aisle. And what these would really be is sort of a low-speed access road that would allow people to get to existing parking and driveway. And it's kind of hard to get in your head from a cross section. So let's look at it from a plan view perspective. So as you can see, there's Red Apple on this side, on the kind of the left side of your screen, and on the right side of the screen is Harlow Street. And here's the roadway with the shared use pathways in white, and the parking aisles are the ones that are kind of dotted in blue. So vehicles would come as they are driving to their destinations. They would basically make turns at the parking aisle entrance locations to access existing parking and driveways. Next slide, please. So for our Kitsap Way corridor, alternative A features the use of shared use pathways on both sides of the street. And these are being shown in these orange boxes. The shared use pathways allow bikes and pedestrians to travel in both directions. And one of the advantages of that is it really reduces the need for people to have to cross Kitsap Way to get to a designated bike lane or that kind of facility. So it's a kind of a simpler way of creating a facility on both sides of the street. Next slide. At intersections, the roadway would pretty much remain kind of in similar configuration as today, but we'd add traffic signals at Chico and North Lake, and then also at Austin and Lyle, to accommodate the forecasted travel needs and also to allow an opportunity to provide a pedestrian crossing. While these intersection configurations are a little bit of a lower cost option, the addition of the traffic signals in this kind of configuration may cause vehicle queuing that would back up and block nearby driveways during busy travel periods, such as during the commute hour. So where we're going now is we'd like your thoughts about alternative A. Natalie.
Thanks. So I'm Natalie. I'm on the engagement team. Some of you may have been at our meeting in December. So we're going to do a similar type of activity using a tool called Mentimeter. And so if you go to menti.com and enter the code that will be shown here on the screen in a second, or I believe Shelly's putting a link in the chat. You can click directly on that. If you're looking at your computer, you can open it up on your phone if you don't have two screens. So that's one way. So we're looking to understand, what you think about the components of alternative A. This is kind of a sliding scale. So take your time to fill this out. The left side is the dislike. You can slide it. In the middle, we kind of consider that as a neutral. You're on the fence about it. And on the right side is that you really like that feature. And this is a little bit fun because we can see your responses in real time. So we'll see what's coming in. And it looks like shared use pathways is a common theme so far. Let us know if you have any issues in the chat and we can help you. And if this isn't working for you, of course, raise your hand and we can try to unmute you and hear your thought real quick. Shared use pathways. I think, John, if we have time, since this is a smaller group, I'm curious if we want to hear from someone about the traffic signal. That one hasn't gotten as much support. So I'm just curious if there's anybody that wanted to either raise their hand or provide their justification for kind of why they don't like that as much. And that's okay. No takers. This is good. I'm glad this worked out. Thank you for entering that. We're going to ask this similar question for alternative B and C as well. So I think, Alaya, go ahead and switch it back.
Okay, so alternative B is our mid-level alternative, and it features corridors it adds new features to the corridor, including public parking in the Kitsap Junction, improved non-motorized facilities, and channelization changes at the intersection to improve operations and safety. As you can see, we're looking at these channelization changes, which are these diamond-shaped pinkish purplish squares at 3 locations. So we'll get into what those are. Next slide. So we're going to start off within our Kitsap Junction again. And here we've got kind of a similar looking thing, but we'd have our shared use path would all of a sudden be running along the front of the businesses on the south side, which is the left side of the street, and new public parking would be added. And the public parking concepts pushes the roadway a teeny bit to the north. Can we go to the next slide, please? Which would reduce the amount of parking on the north side of the street. So there's a little bit of a trade-off here. A similar concept of sort of the parking aisles, being able to access these areas for parking. One of the things that the city has as its in its design standards is that we can't put public parking on an arterial street, which Kitsap Way is. So the way we're working around this is we're providing access using these parking aisles. So that's part of the reason why you're seeing the parking aisles. Next slide, please. So for alternative B, the cross section of the roadway would still be the 3-lane section for vehicles with the sort of that center turn lane that would run continuously along the corridor, and shared use pathways on the one side of the street, shown in the orange box. So on the side going uphill, the shared use pathway could be wider, like 14 feet wide. But on the downhill direction, we thought, well, non-motorized facilities, we might want to add in a downhill bike lane to sort of separate faster moving vehicles or bicycles as they get pulled down by gravity from pedestrians. So kind of get a little bit of separation there. Next slide. So at our intersection of Chico Way, we got a little creative here, and we started looking at what we could do to realign the intersection to slow down traffic as it enters in the Kitsap Junction area. So what we ended up with is we'd sort of bend North Lake Way up to have a stop sign at the end of it. And we'd also have what we call a chicane, which is a channelization change, and it's that little curvy piece that you see on the screen. And the idea of a chicane is you give drivers a sense of, oh, something here's happening, and it really does slow down traffic. So that was really what our intent was with this design. Next slide. At Kitsap, Austin, and Lyle, we would realign the south leg of the intersection to form a standard intersection. And one of the things that this does is it really helps traffic operations and the safety of the intersection. If we don't realign Lyle Avenue, then we have to do some tricky stuff with the signal, but that actually doesn't make the signal work nearly as well as if we realign that south leg to have that standard intersection. Next slide. Alternative B also includes an improvement to the State Route 3 southbound off-ramp, and this is at Auto Center Way. The channelization at the ramp would change to have 2 dedicated left turn lanes. Today, it currently has 1 dedicated lane and 1 which is sort of this shared left through lane. What this allows us to do is to be able to put more efficient signal timing at the intersection, which improves how efficiently we can move vehicles through this intersection. and it really does improve traffic operations. So we're at the point where we're going to get your thoughts on alternative B. Natalie.
I'm back. All right, next slide. So I think we're also going to go back to the Menti. If you still have that link open, great. Otherwise, I believe it's still in the chat. Go to menti.com and enter the code that will be on the screen in a second. And if this isn't showing up the right one, if it doesn't say alternative B on your screen, make sure you press to advance the next slide to catch up. So again, let us know what you think. The left side or the left side of the sliding scale is you don't really like it very much. Middle is neutral and right side is I like that. So I love to see people's feedback coming in real time. And like I said before, if you have a comment you really want to share, feel free to put it in the Q&A. We can get to it later, or if you raise your hand right now, maybe we have time to cover one or two. Right. Give it just a few more. Please let us know if you're having issues also. And I think, we'll talk about our online open house a little bit, but hopefully you're all aware of our online open house. There's opportunities to also provide your kind of feedback that way as well. So this isn't the only way for you to let us know your thoughts, especially as you might be just learning of this information right now. So it looks like slow down. Yeah, it looks like most people like the 3-lane roadway with the center turn lane. And the realignment is kind of closer to the neutral. So thank you. Thank you for that. We'll be back at alternative C to ask you a similar question.
Okay, so we're at our alternative C, which really represents the highest level of change to the corridor. And this idea is to have roundabouts placed throughout the corridor. And these roundabouts would be there to both slow traffic and to help provide access to streets and parcels. So let's dive in a little bit and see how this works. Let's look at the next slide, please. So in the Kitsap Junction area, the cross-section seems somewhat similar to alternative A, where we've got our parking aisles that give access to existing parking and driveways. But there's one big difference, which is instead of being a left turn lane, we now have a solid median running down the middle of the street. And the idea behind this is we no longer have to worry about people trying to make left-hand turns across opposing traffic. So let's look at the plan view just to give a better idea of how this would work. So if you imagine that you're driving in from, say, Chico Way or something like that, if you wanted to get to the Red Apple, you would have to drive around the roundabout at Harlow Street and come back on the other side of the median. So you wouldn't be able to make a left-hand turn there. Similarly, if you're going back the other way, you'd have a roundabout also down at the North Lake Chico intersection that you could turn around and access the other side of the street. Next slide, please. So we have a similar design along the entire corridor with some kind of raised median and roundabouts that select locations to provide access to streets and property. So in this design, bicycles, one of the features here, and you can see them in the orange boxes, is we'd have sort of the highest level and we'd have bike lanes being separated from pedestrians on both sides of the street. And one of the things that we were balancing is we may have something on the left side of the street, which is the west side of the street, where most people would be accessing Kitsap Way, which could be kind of a little bit of a two-way pathway, and also having that downhill bike lane. Next slide. So at intersections, roundabouts are going to be added. And these would be including Chico Way, a roundabout at Austin Drive, and at both State Route 3 ramp intersections. So here's the one that we'd have at Chico and North Lake. This is one of two possibilities we're looking at. This one sort of has a teardrop design, which from North Lake, you would be able to travel directly to Chico. There's another option where all of a sudden you could go from North Lake to Chico as sort of a full roundabout, but there's some trade-offs involved on how big that roundabout needs to be. And there's definitely some engineering issues that we'd have to be concerned about with roundabouts, such as, grades and how much property they may need to take, because roundabouts tend to have a slightly bigger footprint than a intersection. However, let's just go to the next slide here. And so this one here is a concept for Austin Drive. Once again, we would probably want to realign Lyle Street so it would line up well with Austin, and that also improves the efficiency. We also envision at some point having a roundabout at the SR3 off ramps, both of them. They would probably have to be multiple lane roundabouts, not single lane roundabouts, which they're a little bit more complex, but once again, all roundabouts tend to provide good traffic operations and some proved safety when compared to traffic signals. However, as I mentioned, they're typically larger footprint at the intersections. They may require some additional right-of-way, which means there may be some impacts to nearby properties. So right now, I guess we're going to have some of your thoughts about alternative C.
All right. We're all pros now at Mentimeter. So if you can click on that link in the chat, I don't know, Shelly, if you can put it right back into the chat at the top, or go to menti.com. Same nature, left side, you just like it, middle is neutral, and the right side is more of liking that element. So tell us what you think about alternative C. And I see some questions coming in for our Q&A. I just wanted to acknowledge that we see those, and we're going to make sure to address those during our session there. So thank you for that. Ooh, lots of likes. Right. Let us know if you're having any technical issues with this. This input, we'll save this input that you're providing right now, and it'll be part of our summary of this kind of outreach effort that we're doing right now. Great. Okay, it looks like the roundabout at Chico Way is strongly liked, kind of a front runner. This is not comparative. This is just for us to get a kind of a temperature read on how the community feels about certain elements. So I think that's great. All right. Thanks for that. I think it looks like it's slowed down. I'm going to hand it back to you, John, and then I will be back again in a little bit.
Okay, so we have been kind of thinking about these alternatives quite a bit, and also comparing them back to a number of criteria, and these are criteria that were really similar to the criteria we used to develop the alternatives. So we did this assessment where we looked at how closely each alternative met the criterion that we established. And it's either it sort of meets it, it surpasses it by a margin, or it kind of falls short. And one of the things that we kind of discovered is each alternative really has areas of strength and weakness. And one of the things we're going to add in our final analysis, because this is really kind of a draft analysis, is a public support criteria. And so input from both tonight and also from our ongoing open house, that feedback will get processed into this alternatives analysis, where it will help us get a real clear understanding on what things people liked and what things people didn't like. Next slide. So as we described earlier, all the alternatives are going to all of the alternatives will reconstruct Kitsap Way. And that's a big part of the expense, is really just to try to make Kitsap Way a good street with a good solid foundation, so the roadway isn't going to crack in 2 years, and to put in some good stormwater facilities, adding new lighting and landscaping. All those things are going to be common on and really be part of the cost. So between our alternatives, most of the cost differences are really related to types of non-motorized facilities, such as, whether or not you just put in a shared use path or you're putting in the bike lanes, the types of intersection improvements, whether they're the roundabouts or putting in a traffic signal, and also the cost associated with potentially having to purchase some right of way. For example, when you realign Lyle Street, there would be probably a cost associated with purchasing the property to the south. In all likelihood, the final design is going to have elements of each of the alternatives. It may not be alternative A completely or alternative C completely. It may be a mix of those things. So our final Menti question, which Natalie's going to do, is really helping us identify which of the elements are most important.
That's right. Yep. So if you go back to the Menti link, hopefully you're not too tired of doing that, or you still have it open. This is a chance for you to select 4. These are the elements from across all of the different alternatives. And this is just going to help us look at kind of what those front runners are, so we know what the top priorities are for the community, at least those who are present today. So take a minute to look at those and see which ones are really important to you. We have the parking aisles and the private parking. We have the shared use paths, the center turn lane, some of those new signals, the public angle parking up in the Kitsap Junction, that dedicated downhill bike lane. We have the realigned intersections, the separation of the bike lanes and walkways, that hard median, and then the roundabouts, which was alternative C. Take a minute and fill that out. Right. Kind of fun to watch this come in live polling. Looks like shared use paths are definitely important. The realigned intersections and roundabouts, and I feel like that really aligns with a little bit of what we heard in our first round of engagement when we did our online open house and virtual presentation. We heard a lot of support for those items as well. give that just a few more minutes. Katie, did you have something you wanted to plug in? No, just show it up. Okay. All right. Keep your Menti open. We're going to go to the next slide and it should advance for you. Elia, if you can go advance to the next one. Our last question. Oh, the next Menti. There we go. This is a little different and this is open. So this is a chance for you to write it in. Again, if you'd rather put it in the Q&A for us to have, that's great. Or if someone wants to raise their hand, I do think we have time right now. We want to know how do you feel these alternatives will either positively or negatively affect your use of the Kitsap Way corridor? Let us know. Whatever you type in will show up here kind of in real time. You're limited in words. Tough question. John, I wonder while people are thinking if you want to answer one question real quick. I think someone had a question about access to Wilmot Street with those alternatives.
Yeah, so Wilmot Street is going to be a little bit of something that once we start getting into final design, we'll get a better handle on. One of the things we realize is drivers tend to cut the corner too much. And so we're hoping to be able to get some kind of turn lane in there for Wilmot Street. So if you're coming from the interchange and trying to turn on Wilmot Street, there will be a left turn pocket that you pull into rather than sort of flowing out of the through lane into Wilmot Street as they sort of do today. That's kind of as far as we've taken it, because that's sort of the point where we're transitioning from what I sort of see as a single lane in each direction to the 2 lanes in each direction. So we need to kind of figure out how all that stuff would work together. But we would, in all likelihood, it would still, we're not going to close it off at this point. It would, we're going to have to look at how that would work best for each of the alternatives.
Thanks. Thank you. And it looks like we've gotten some feedback here, a lot of safety theme, which is great, much safer, looking for the realignment on Austin Drive, slowing down traffic, reducing accidents, and a better flow is all positive. Bike lanes are a huge improvement. Improved access, pedestrian and bike access and safety. Also at the North Lake intersection, the roundabouts would improve my safety through Lyle and Kitsap Way daily. And then current access to my neighborhood feels unsafe whether I am riding a bike or driving. So these improvements will drastically lower my anxiety. I think that's very positive. Need maneuvering ability for buses in roundabouts. So that's kind of a question. I wonder if we can just address that real quick so we don't lose track of it. Would buses be in lane stops or pullouts for the roundabouts, John?
Well, so that's kind of 2 different things. One is buses and roundabouts in the past, bus drivers are concerned if they need to be able to make a left-hand turn, can they get around the roundabout, or are they gonna start bumping over the edges of it? And that's in part, one of the things that we're going to do as part of our design process is we're going to lay out these roundabouts and make sure that our design vehicle, which may be a bus, it may be a slightly larger truck, like, something that would be a delivery van, or even something like a moving truck, would be able to make it around the roundabout. And there's a few design features we can do, such as sometimes you see roundabouts where they sort of have a little bit of an apron around it, as we call it, where big vehicles can actually mount up onto the roundabout so they can make it around the corner. The other aspect is we've been talking with Kitsap Transit, and we wanted to get their thoughts on whether or not they would want to stop in the lane of traffic, or would they like a bus pullout? And they are a little bit, well, they could live with either of those two alternatives. And so we're tending to be a little bit more on the side of wanting to have bus pullouts, just because that way the buses can kind of pull out of the flow of traffic and not back up traffic if, you know, they need to do a wheelchair loading or something like that. So.
All right. Thank you. Well, thank you for all of this feedback. We're going to pass this off to, I think, Katie, you're going to take it home, and then we'll open it up for Q&A in a second.
Yeah, thank you all again for all of your time and your great feedback. I see some really good questions coming in the Q&A, which we will address here in just a moment. And just want to highlight again that we do have an online open house open until July 5th. So you can visit that. You'll see all the same information, but it might give you some time to take another look and give us some more thoughts that you have. Share it with your friends, your neighbors, people who you think might be affected by the project, to give them a chance to give their feedback, because it's very, very critical for this project that we get community feedback, because it's going to help us to determine what alternatives, what aspects of each alternative we want to put forward into our preferred alternative. Also, we have a demographics survey that is completely voluntary. If you're interested in taking that, there's a link up on the screen. I also put a direct link into the chat, so you can follow that and take that quick survey. It just takes about 2 minutes. And before anyone drops off, I do want to highlight that the city has another open house meeting for our View Ridge Safe Routes to School project coming up next week, Tuesday, June 27th from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. That will be an in-person open house held at View Ridge Elementary School Library. So if you get a chance, please come out and visit us for that open house. So with that, we can start in on questions. Natalie, if you're
ready.
Facilitating.
Yeah. I think the first question I wanted to pose was, what is the net parking gain or loss of the 3 alternatives in the Kitsap Junction? What does that look like?
So just to highlight that there's a lot of right-of-way in that Kitsap Junction area, and the businesses along there are using that space for parking. It's not, it's not technically the city's parking, and a lot of it's not, there's not like specific parking spaces. So I think it's a little bit of a difficult question to ask like definitively, but I think John's got some information, a little bit more information on the parking.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So with parking, like Katie said, it is difficult because right now there's a little bit of, people are parking where they can just to get off Kitsap Way. So for most of the businesses, with all the alternatives, that have a similar amount of parking. Now, for the one where there's public parking, that's really going to be changing because it isn't going to be a dedicated parking space for an individual business. The other two parking aisle concepts still would retain that, but when you have public parking, somebody can pull in the spot and then go 3 businesses down. So it's a little bit different on how that parking is and how it's going to be treated. The other aspect is when we had that public parking alternative on the south side, we pretty much had the same amount of parking as there is today. And that's ballparking it a little bit just because we had to count, how many spaces and how people are kind of squeezing in various places. But then on the north side of the street, because the Kitsap Way would actually have to squeeze a little bit further to the north, there's one of the businesses would actually probably lose quite a bit of parking. So that was one of the downsides of that alternative. And it's difficult, if that's something that we end up going with. We're going to definitely have to sort of do a lot of trade-offs between how do we maintain parking that might be necessary for businesses. And we're one of the things that we have in our scope is to kind of work really directly with each of the businesses along that corridor and be able to talk with them and try to get a really good idea of how our preferred alternative can work and meet their needs as well.
Thank you. All right, next question is, how is the city's work on West Kitsap Way being coordinated with the county as it connects at Chico?
Yeah, that's a great question because at Chico, when you cross over into the county, it's a much more rural roadway. One way we're, first of all, aware that we need to make that transition from the city into the county. And we also have on our stakeholder, our steering committee, we have a planner from Kitsap County who is helping to make sure that we can make those transitions work.
Great, thank you. It looks like we actually have a hand raised. So Charlie, I'm going to allow you to talk real quick here and see if you still want to.
Yes. So my question regards the intersection at Lyle and Austin Drive and Kitsap Way. And you focused, John, on realigning Lyle by, I assume, moving the roadway to the south so it lines up with Austin, and that would require getting some property. But have you looked at instead moving the roadway Austin to the north? And so, we own that property, the city does, that's the park, and line it up that way. And what there's a big win associated with that, or I'd say a modest win. So when I did a conceptual design for Austin Drive for bike paths, we just didn't have the width at the top of that hill with the stone pillars and the width of the roadway there, just as you at the top of Austin Drive. And if you move the roadway, now suddenly we've got room for a climbing lane, a bike lane for the bikes coming up Austin Drive. And Austin Drive has been rechannelized down at SR3 and below. And so we've got great bike lanes there. And then we are just thrown to the wolves as cycling as we come up the hill. So this would, if we instead realigned Austin Drive to line up with Lyle, it gives us the opportunity to put in a bike lane, at least for part of that area, and probably expand the roadway later on down between there and SR3. Then we have one continuous bike lane all the way up Austin Drive.
Well, Charlie, Charlie, I think that's a very interesting idea and probably one worth taking a harder look at. Typically we follow a path of least resistance, and sometimes, if we have impacts to parks or something along those lines, we tend to be hesitant to be able to suggest, let's do that. But I do understand your idea of maybe if something could get shifted a little bit to the west, let's say, you would then be able to get that climbing lane on that segment of Austin Drive, which would definitely be an advantage. So it's something that we could certainly take another look at and see how best we could do that realignment. One of the other things that was kind of coming into play, there was a development plan a few years ago, which went away, but there was a potential that the developer might have realigned Lyle, that south leg, to align with Austin Drive. So anyway, terrific idea.
Thanks, Charlie. Another question from the Q&A. I'm interested to learn more about future traffic forecasts that are used to develop these alternatives. What is the volume of traffic now, and how much is it forecast to grow over the planning horizon?
Okay, that one's definitely in my wheelhouse. So what we do is we go through a series of collecting traffic data, and we do some comparison analysis to the traffic models that exist out here. And the Puget Sound Regional Council is really the source of our traffic modeling data. And so what they basically are doing is they're looking ahead out to 2050 on how much growth is going to be occurring on each and every corridor in the area. And then from that information, we basically need to calibrate it back to our data that we have. And then we get a forecast. So in terms of the volumes now, on a daily basis, there's somewhere between 10 and 11,000 vehicles, depending where you pick on the corridor. That sounds like a huge number, but if you just take Kitsap Way on the east side of SR3, it's something like 32,000. So like 3 times the number of people are on that other side of State Route 3 going up and down Kitsap Way. So we definitely have a smaller number. And then in terms of our forecast, I believe it's something like, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's somewhere in like 28% growth over that entire planning horizon, which is somewhere between 1 and 2% on an annual basis. So there's growth occurring on the corridor. It's not forecast to be, doing something exponential. And then I might add that with a 3-lane alternative, you typically can accommodate somewhere between 17 and 18,000 vehicles per day on sort of what we've designed, sort of this 3-lane cross section, or the 2 lanes with the median. And it will work fabulously. And in fact, you don't get a whole lot more with having 4 lanes if you don't have any sort of turn lanes, because people block one of the 3 lanes when they have to make a left turn. So but that's just one of the good things about putting in a turn lane, is you get people out of the way and not block the rest of the traffic.
All right. We've got 3 more questions. I'm going to call on Paul. I'm going to unmute you here. Hopefully, oh, wait.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. So actually, I like Charlie's idea of moving the Austin Drive to the west. It would go right through what a current parking lot is there. But parking is an issue in the park. So the unused cabin could go away and you'd have a lot more parking space on the east side of Austin Drive. And by moving the road, you would also have justification for creating pedestrian entries into the park, which don't exist right now. There is no pedestrian entry into the park. So realigning and reconfiguring the entire southern entrance to the park is probably a very desirable thing if it can be accomplished with transportation dollars, because the Parks Department doesn't have the money to do that themselves.
Okay. So what I heard from Paul is the idea of maybe having that unused cabin become sort of parking area, and being able to trade that out for realigning Austin so it would align with Lyle. So certainly this is something that we can talk through, and we did have a person in our steering committee who was from the Parks Department as well. So they are informed of some of our ideas up to this point, but we can certainly bring this one back to them as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. All right, two more questions. At SR3 and Kitsap Way, there are currently green bike lanes that are a huge improvement to what used to exist. How do you plan to integrate bike lanes, bikes into the roundabout at SR3? Not all roundabouts treat bikes and pedestrians safely.
Yeah. And I mean, this is an important question, because typically what we do is we will basically get the bikes out of the bike lane and then bend them up to one of the legs so they can cross the leg of the intersection, if you can follow me here, without having to like go through the roundabout, because roundabouts tend to be, you got vehicles looking for gaps and lots of stuff happening, and bikes seem like it would be difficult. So what we'd probably do is do a shared use pathway getting to this point where close to where cars are waiting, and then being able to cross them. There's kind of a standard design now on how you do that. And then depending on the number of the volumes and the number of legs that people have to cross, you may do one of those flashing lights for a crossing where people could push the button as they're going across and let drivers know that they're there and they need to yield to the pedestrians.
All right, I have one more question. And that is, I might need some help with this one, but I would be interested in hearing thoughts about our RAB without the raised median. What does RAB mean for this?
That would be roundabout.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Roundabout.
Yeah. Without the raised median, You know, you could do that. It would maybe lose one of the aspects that people, or, you know, one of the aspects where you improve the safety between the two roundabouts by having some sort of median, but you could end up having some kind of similar two-way left turn lane down the middle, sort of a continuous left turn lane where people who were turning in between the roundabouts could either access a driveway or a very small side street. So it is a possibility.
Right. That's all we have left in our Q&A queue. And I don't think I see anything left in the chat. I just want to give a minute, a space. If anyone else has remaining questions, they can raise their hand. We certainly don't have to extend this till 7:30 if there's no more questions for the group, but wanted to give some space. All right. I think we're good. And let's see, Elia, is there a next slide after this? Oh, there we are. Perfect. Katie, did you want to take us home?
We
and
got
just
one
kind of-
more question that popped in.
Fantastic. Let's see. You are redefining this little business district. Which option is the safest for peds and bikes? Is the question.
Good question. All of them would be safer, let's just say, than probably today. All of them really have, all three of the alternatives have in mind trying to slow people down. And that's probably one of the reasons why there is sort of that need. One of the factors that we really kind of put up a little flag about when we're looking at the data initially is how fast people are driving down this corridor. And so in answer to your question, I would think that either alternative B, which was sort of the chicane one with a little curvy line, would be a good one, or a roundabout would also be a good one for pedestrians and bikes. The signal alternative, there's always sort of a little bit of an issue where if people are trying to make, you know, make the yellow, you know, as my sister used to say, squeeze the lemon in order to get through the yellow light at the interchange, they might speed up, and that would not really be as good as in terms of our objective of what we wanted for this corridor. So
John, I like that. I'm gonna have to use that squeeze the lemon. That's a new one on me. I like it a lot. We have one more question about when do we anticipate construction beginning and ending? That's a great question. This is just, you know, these are the initial planning phases, and we'll get our preferred alternative and our concepts nailed down. And then the next steps will be for the city to start pursuing funding for these projects based on our prioritized list of projects. I would anticipate that we'll have several phases because this is a very long corridor. So there could be, you know, several different construction periods for a project like this. And it's probably going to take, you know, 5, 10, 15 years to get all of our desired improvements completed along West Kitsap Way. Well, not under construction for 10 to 15 years. Let me clarify that. Construction periods would be, you know, more defined to like one summer off for a couple of summers and then another summer of construction. But to get the whole corridor done, it's going to take a number of years. So I hope that answered your question.
All right. I think that was our last question, unless there's more. So Katie, let's have you wrap it up.
Yes, thank you all so much. Again, thank you so much for giving us your time this evening to share this information. And we really appreciate all of the feedback that we've gotten this evening and will be used to help us make decisions in this project. So you can stay informed in the project. You can reach out to me directly if you have any follow-up questions. And you can check out the project webpage. The link is there right at the bottom of your screen. And just have a wonderful evening, and thank you very much.